love horror games.
If it hasn't been made blatantly obvious by the topics I cover on the main channel and the games that I play on the second channel, the horror genre is a special one to me because horror games evoke a feeling that a lot of genres can't do, which is to instill fear in your tiny little heart. Something pops up on the screen that shouldn't and the poor thing just explodes. In recent years though, it seems like the genre has gotten a little stale and boring, especially in the land of the AAA. Name a genuinely good AAA horror game that was released in the last 3 years. Exactly, it's emptier than my own channel. I will stand by the notion that the last good AAA horror game that wasn't a remake was Resident Evil 7, and since then the genre has been cursed. Sure, there were a couple of games here and there released to the public, but most of them range from bad to mid. But why is this? I mean, it should be relatively easy to make a horror game nowadays. Just throw together some assets from the Unity store and then program in a jump scare and bingo! $1 million deposited into your account in approximately 30 days. But this is part of the reason why major horror games aren't released nowadays and has led people to ask the general public what it would take to fix the horror genre. The biggest reason as to why AAA horror games seem to be lacking lately can be boiled down to the fact that the common game enjoyer just doesn't have the attention span to last for a full 492-hour open-world MMORPG gacha horror game nowadays. Or maybe a long horror game can be decent. Just make a game so long that you forget it's supposed to be a horror game and then all of a sudden your heart is 6 meters away from where it's meant to be. Horror is a genre that's incredibly reliant on feeling something from the experience, mainly fear. Ooh. If you come out of a horror experience without feeling scared once, is it really horror? Or do you just have balls of steel? It's one of the reasons that I honestly think TV horror doesn't do as well as a horror movie. It's harder to get people consistently scared if you take them out of the experience for about a week before throwing them back in, with the exception of anthologies and one-shots. This is also why one-shot horror games in the indie genre do so well. Now, in every video, I've mentioned that the indie horror game community does a much better job at curating a good horror game experience than the AAA horror game industry, because of the variety of games that are available to consume on pretty much a daily basis. For the price of one major horror game from a AAA developer, you could play 60 of them that would arguably scare you more on sites such as Itch.io. However, this wasn't always the case with the rise of the RPG maker horror genre of the late 2000s and early 2010s. These games helped to bridge the gap between lengthy games and the general horror experience, most of these games being rich in story and chock full of scares left, right, and center. Literally everything in these games were out to kill you. But there's a game that I neglected to mention on purpose that has taken over my life for about 6 years. It's considered the godfather of the genre, the big boss, the great kahuna. Are you talking to me? Shut up, man! It's also a video that I'm really going to enjoy editing and post. Isn't that right, Thaf?
Thanks, prick.
You're very welcome. Just one simple game managed to spawn a massive franchise from such a relatively simple concept. The game in question is called Corpse Party. Corpse Party is a franchise that I hold very close to my heart for a variety of reasons. It was my gateway into horror games when I was just a lowly secondary school student studying for exams while pissing and shitting. My love for Corpse Party also coincided with the time I got into more edgy anime. Fun story, so my first experience with horror manga was when I found out about the Bongshon Dong Ghost manga when I was 12, and my school forgot to make sure that the students were not admins, so I found the original link, set the recipients to everyone in the school younger than me, and clicked send. Yeah, I probably should not have done that. Was I damaged when I was younger? Probably. Anyway, most people's introduction to Corpse Party would have been via the PSP game that was released in 2012. But what if I told you that the franchise has been a thing for over 20 years? In fact, it's so expansive that it rivals Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and Divergent... No, not Divergent. When it comes to the amount of content surrounding it. From just one small game, it spawned a franchise spanning 12 games, several manga adaptations, an anime adaptation, and a live-action adaptation. Yes, you are not hearing things, there were 2 live-action adaptations of Corpse Party, and in this video, I'll be going over the entire franchise. Even the live-action movies. Over the past few months, I've spent hours upon hours in this pointless journey to go through the entirety of the Corpse Party franchise through thick and thin, and believe me when I say that I have seen things. I have seen things mere mortals could not even begin to understand. This franchise is known across the interlands as one of the most gruesome franchises ever made, and for good reason. It's literally in the title, for God's sake, you're partying with corpses! After seeing how expansive the franchise is, I decided to go and play through all of it. Yeah, even Blood Drive, and those of you who are well acquainted with the franchise know how much of a chore it is to get through the game. I spent a grand total of 4 years working on this video between waiting for games to release and going through several script rewrites and a lot of frustration, so hopefully the century-long wait between the last video and this one is worth it. But there's only so many ways that I can describe the franchise as ew, gross! And I feel like I've been a bit vague for too long, so I guess now is the time where I drop all of the crypticness and talk about the game. Of course, there are going to be spoilers for the entire franchise, so if you want to experience it yourself without any prior knowledge, the door is over here, it's right here. Look, I've spawned one in. You can just walk right in. There we go. There we go. Now that those people are gone, let's commence our deep dive into the Corpse Party franchise, beginning with... The year is 1996. The Nintendo 64 had just been released and set out to ruin the lives of several speedrunners that hadn't been born yet. DVDs finally launched in Japan and set out to ruin the lives of several mathematicians and scientists that hadn't even been born yet. And the mad cow disease hit the land of the Blighty. Our good friends over at ASCII went and released a program titled RPG Maker 98, also known as Dante 98. But the difference between this version of RPG Maker and the others was that this wasn't actually released on Windows. No, not even Billiam Gates had access to the software. He was permanently locked out and had no access whatsoever. Dante was released for the NEC PC 9801 home system in Japan. This machine emanated soul. Only the highest quality games could ever be released on this system. This was the RTX 3090 of the 90s. You try and play a game that required more than 3.5 pixels and... With the release of Dante, ASCII needed a way to market it to the masses, so they introduced a concept that will come synonymous with the gaming industry, mainly the current state of the horror industry, and that is the concept of game jams. To promote Dante, ASCII decided to publish a monthly magazine which went by the name of Login Softcom, which stood for Login Software Company, where amateur developers could submit their games and have a chance to be featured. One plucky lad who went by the name of Makoto Kedouin submitted a game to the magazine on April the 22nd, 1996. The game went by the name of Corpse Party, and it managed to get published in the spring 1996 edition of the mag.
Very nice.
It didn't win the competition though, it got second place. Guess that means the game is shit then. Corpse Party took inspiration from a Capcom released horror game which went by the name of Sweet Home, released on the Famicom in 1989 and based on the Japanese horror film of the same name. Sweet Home can be considered the true godfather of the entire horror RPG genre, as that game influenced a lot of tropes that can be seen in Corpse Party, and influenced the development of the Resident Evil franchise, which was actually supposed to be a remake of Sweet Home. My head hurts. You're going to see a lot of comparisons with Sweet Home and Corpse Party, as a lot of gameplay and story beats are used between both games, such as the notion that if a character dies in the game, a version of them dies in real life. Similar to Sweet Home, you also begin the game in a party of 5, and you have the ability to switch between multiple parties split into 2. I'll get into that a little later. Anyway, upon the release of Corpse Party, it made waves across the small gaming community because unlike all other games released for the competition, this game was an RPG. With no RPG elements! Since technology wasn't incredibly advanced back then, going through the pause menu of the game will make you a little confused as to why and how any of the characters are even worried for their lives in the first place when they literally have magic. Because the game was developed with such a strict time limit of about 3 or 4 seconds, a lot of creative liberties had to be taken in this initial version of the game. For example, instead of the very long and convoluted story that the Corpse Party franchise is now known for, the premise was quite simple. A group of students, +1, have all gathered in a school after class, and as a punishment for being so much of a teacher's pet that they decided to stay behind at school for some after-school activities, they get transported to a haunted elementary school in a parallel universe, and now they have to find their way out. There was no curse, there was no ceremony. The story was as simple as reading the phone book backwards. While the game's visuals looked new and refreshing at the time, you could tell that the developer found out about the clone stamp tool for the first time, because tiles and graphics are repeated everywhere in the game. Because of the tech and time limitations that the game had, the decorations around the school that the characters end up in look repetitive and boring. As such, when the game got inevitably remade 15 years later as Corpse Party Rebuilt, the developers focused more on the environment of the game as opposed to the gameplay outlined in the original. I've spent this long talking about the game without talking about the characters, so I guess I should probably do that now. Now let me address the big elephant in the room. Where are all the other characters that franchise fans have come to know and love for about 3 seconds before they disappear forever, never to be seen again? Well, obviously because of the time constraints that were placed on the original version of Corpse Party, there was no time to make sure that the game was optimized to have more than 5 main protagonists in the game at any given time. Any more and your precious NEC PC would have met a swift end. So the game gives you 5 playable characters, although I wouldn't say all of them are playable because the majority of the game has you playing the perspective of the team leaders once the split ends up happening. Maybe Kedwin jumped into the future and saw just how frustrating it is when you find a character in a cave in Pokemon and you're forced to let them tag along because you can't cancel the dialogue, and you can't escape because you can't use your Pokemon to fly away because they can't carry more than one person! Anyway, in no particular order, I will list out the main characters of the original Corpse Party story. You've got Satoshi, by default the main protagonist of the entire franchise, and as such is the coward of the group, since he has to act as the stand-in to the audience who have absolutely no idea what they're getting themselves into. You end up playing as him the most in the entire franchise, which I'll get into later, and he is described as being a natural leader of the group. You have Naomi, the poster girl of the entire franchise. She exists in this franchise to suffer. I don't know what Kedwin had against people whose names are Naomi, and if he got bullied by someone called Naomi, then that would explain just how much suffering she goes under as the games go by. She is absolutely a ghost magnet. There's Ayumi, the class president, which is already a red flag, and a big fan of the occult, which is an even redder flag. Remember the times when you were 14 years old and you just discovered creepypastas for the first time? Or maybe you Remember the times when you were 14 years old and you just discovered creepypastas for the first time? Or maybe you watch my content, or these people. That's Ayumi. That's right, you are all Ayumi. Yoshiki is an imposter. No, shut up! I'm not talking about you. Yoshiki's the most interesting character of the entire original cast because he's actually the only one who goes through some sort of character development from the original to the PSP version of the game. Like, look at him. You can't look at this and tell me this is actually Yoshiki. All the other characters are kind of similar to what people remember them as, but Yoshiki looks like a placeholder that someone who has 2 minutes to submit a PowerPoint presentation had to use as clip art for an anti-bullying campaign. Finally, you have Yuka. Moving swiftly on back to the gameplay, and the gameplay is just as you expect an RPG Maker horror game to play, and uses gameplay beats that have become a staple of the franchise for future installments, for better and worse. For example, due to the time constraints, most of the puzzles in the game boil down to picking up an item and using it elsewhere, or flipping switches that change something elsewhere in the building. The game is fairly primitive and repetitive, but it was very story driven. Even though it's not as elaborate as the later games in the franchise, the game quickly became a certified cult classic too. Another concept that will become a very important part of the franchise is the notion that the game has multiple different endings. Not as much as the later ones, of course, but Corpse-Party essentially graded you on how well you played the game, with an A rank being awarded for making sure everyone's alive and well, a B rank for losing 1 member, all the way down to a D rank if you end up losing more. You killed 3 people in cold blood? F- see me after class, you psycho! Now, if you want to play Corpse-Party 98, you're completely shit out of luck, again, because it's a certified antique. You get caught trying to run this thing and your whole house turns into stone. Worse still, no version of the game exists in English, so unless you want to go through the whole trouble of emulation, you won't be able to experience the original Corpse Party yourself. But the game ended up getting a soft remake in 2011 titled Corpse Party Rebuilt, and this was made using RPG Maker XP, including things like slightly improved graphics and an edit to one of the endings of the original game. One downgrade that was made from the original was the fact that RPG Maker XP added a variety of features, one of the most revolutionary being the inclusion of a run mechanic. To compensate for this new run mechanic, the developers of Rebuilt decided to slow down the original speed to the point that it is a literal crawl. Any slower and you would be going backwards. Corpse Party sent waves through the Japanese horror community as people flocked to the game to experience some low-budget spooks, and Kedwin set out to ride the wave until it fizzled out, as he began work on a sequel almost immediately after the release of Corpse Party titled Satsuki's Heart. That didn't go far. After that cancellation though, the game's franchise wouldn't see any new titles for years. That is, until a game would come out that would give the franchise the reputation it has today, adding so many new characters, expanding the lore by a lot, and being a staple of the entire horror genre. And that game is... Corpse Party, also known as Corpse Party Blood Covered, also known as Corpse Party Blood Covered Repeated Fear, also known as New Puyo Puyo Corpse Party Blood Covered Repeated Fear on Games for Windows Live Remake, is the golden goose of the entire franchise. You want to get introduced to the franchise? Well, this is your official entry point. This game takes everything that the original 1998 version had and injects it with copper sulfate laced with some blood of the Elder Gods. After riding the success of the original, Kedwin did a super smart thing and founded a studio known as Team Gris, with the intention of rebooting integrating Corpse Party into the franchise that we know and love today. This was no easy task, but they did it. The production history of the game is very interesting as there are lots of versions to choose from, and an outsider will feel intimidated by just how much choice there is. You choose one version of the game and you get pulled apart by PlayStation Puritans pissed off that you picked the PC edition of the popular franchise. The initial intention of Gris Squared was to develop the game for a mobile audience as early as 2007. They foresaw the success of genre smash hits such as Raid Shadow Legends and Diablo Immortal and Genshin Impact, and wanted to get there first. Don't know how they were going to do it when iPhones didn't exist back then. Maybe they'd have it working on a Nokia brick? Anyway, the game was released as New Chapter, and the reason why I don't have any gameplay is because it doesn't exist. Yeah, it just released episodically and then they cancelled it. The only thing from that game that can be seen really are promotional screenshots showing the contents of the game, I guess. After the cancellation of New Chapter, the developers went back to the drawing board. What do they do now? They captured the mobile market a little too early and needed to make some money, and that was when the chosen platform arrived. Windows. The developers moved on over to developing on Windows and changed the title of the game from New Chapter to Blood Covered. Edgy. In 2008, the game was again released episodically, and the Windows version of the game introduced a notion that will also be very relevant throughout the rest of the video. Voice acting. The PC version of the game introduced voice actors into the franchise, although they are not the voice actors you're all familiar with. Not yet. The devs aren't made of that much money, and the voice acting wasn't throughout the game, with the developers electing to have voice acting only be in important scenes. The PC version of Corpse Party is the version that most people may be familiar with, as that is the most accessible version of the game. The only problem with the PC version being that it is the most vanilla of the lot. The character sprites aren't the detailed ones that the franchise is known for just yet, and the school, which hadn't actually received a proper name yet, didn't look incredibly detailed. However, development of the Windows edition of Corpse Party ended up being halted by the publisher of the games, 5PB, who bought the rights to the game and sanctioned a release for the PSP, patching in Repeated Fear into the title of the game. CPBCRF was released in 2010, featuring all 5 chapters, and was released in the West in 2011 as just Corpse Party. This game is the definitive Corpse Party game, containing the groundwork for the entirety of the Corpse Party franchise, adding in multiple characters, fleshing out the school, and featuring the soundtrack that the franchise is all too known for, which I will get into later. This game was also the game that had the money poured into it, as 5PB took the original voice actors, sent them on their way, and replaced them with bigger industry names, with one of the most notable voice actors in the entire cast being the voice of Sachiko, who also voices Pikachu, so that makes the game infinitely funnier when you think of Pikachu brutally murdering several children in a haunted school because he's tired of being bossed around by his masters. Since the PSP version is the most important version of the game for this video, this is the part of the video where I have to cover the plot as fast as I can for those of you guys who are too scared to play the game, or you just want your memories jogged as to what happened. I played the 3DS version of the game, and you can watch footage of it on my Twitch channel, which will be linked in the description and will show up around here. So if you want the full experience, go there. But without further ado, the game begins with Ayumi telling a story to her fellow classmate, similar to the opening of the original PC-98 game. But immediately there's a major difference between versions, and it's not just that the game looks better, but there are more complete and utter strangers introduced to the cast that weren't there before. Yes, in this version of Corpse Party, several characters were patched in to flesh out the story and pad the game's runtime. Seiko, who is Naomi's best friend and resident funny man of the group, Morishige, a wannabe stage actor who's incredibly reserved and cares for Mayu, pretty much the reason why everything in the game happens. It's her fault! And last but not least, the teacher, Miss Yui. After the scary story, news breaks that Mayu is leaving Kisaragi Academy. I forgot to mention that the school has a name now, and they kind of already knew Mayu was leaving, but you don't know this until the events of the second game. Mayu is about to escape everything that happens in the game, but Ayumi browsed one too many 4chan paranormal threads and conjures up an idea to make sure that the group stays friends forever. I mean, how the hell did no one just outright refuse to do it when she said she got this from the internet? The charm is called the Sachiko Ever After charm, and you have to repeat a sentence multiple times for every person in the room, or else you fall into the void. Someone doesn't do the charm right and they all fall into the void. But technically speaking, the source that Ayumi got the information about the charm from was lying for clicks on the internet, and they all fell for it, and now they're stuck in a haunted school named Heavenly Host. And they've all been separated and they've got to escape. There's the setup. I'll talk about the game again now. You start the game as Naomi and Seiko, and your job is pretty much to explore the school and learn more about the situation that you've landed yourselves in, and oh boy, It's not a good situation. A lot of the school seems to have missing chunks and is susceptible to earthquakes left, right, and center. The major selling point of Corpse Party is just how expansive the game's environment is, especially compared to the original. Literally everything got a facelift, with the dark, miserable school atmosphere being what drove most people to the very detailed story. The biggest difference between CP-BCRF and CP-98 is the fact that in this version of the game, instead of all the characters being stuck together and splitting up of their own accord, which is incredibly dumb, the game makes use of alternate dimensions to trap the main characters in and build on one of the biggest things Corpse Party has to offer, and its psychological horror fueled by isolation. What the original game lacked was the atmosphere to sell such a horrifying story. It was essentially just a haunted mansion of jump scares. In CP-BCRF, the gloomy environment of Heavenly Host feels more real, especially because there's just so much ground to cover and so much to explore, and the game continuously beats you over the head with the notion that you are alone. There's no one coming to rescue you, most of the ghosts in the game want you dead, and there's zero hope of escape. All of this is highlighted the most in the very first chapter as a way to make sure you know just how screwed you are. Corpse Party is a very big fan of the notion of tell, don't show, but this actually works in their favor because the game does not shy away from gruesome descriptions of the fates of each of the characters in the game. As you explore the school more and more, you'll end up coming across multiple bodies on the floor. Sometimes these bodies have notes with them written by the poor souls that had somehow found themselves in Heavenly Host. And the notes really try and mess with the morale of the protagonists of the game, focusing on psychological threats that come with being trapped in a miserable school for hours if not days on end, with the constant fear of vengeful spirits coming to murder you at any given point. Things such as characters feeling incredibly homesick and slowly starving from the lack of food. This is one of the strongest points of Corpse Party, the ability to have you care so much for each of the characters, as Kedwin's writing focuses on the characterization of the main group, with backstories for all of them before, during, and after their deaths. I haven't even talked about the deaths yet. One of the biggest selling points of Corpse Party is kind of in the name. You're partying with corpses, damn it! There are an imperial truck ton of deaths in this game. Some are completely avoidable and are a direct result of you being a bad gamer, such as letting yourself get caught by the ghosts, which is actually really hard to do. You have to be very, very bad in order to die that way. What's wrong with you? Other deaths, however, are completely unavoidable, and unlike the original Corpse Party game, killing any of the party members in your group doesn't warrant a game over. You gotta continue on without that party member and play towards the ending, because we're David Cage now. You ever played Heavy Rain? Ever heard of that old relic of a studio that goes by the name of Telltale Games? Each choice you make in Corpse Party, and mind you, there aren't that many choices to make, it's not as fleshed out as the most KG of David Cage games, but you better choose the right option or else you could land yourself a wrong end. Wrong ends are also a franchise staple for Corpse Party, and in most cases, there are fully fleshed out endings based on something that you did in that chapter beforehand. Or maybe you did something that the game gave absolutely no hints that you were even supposed to do in the first place, leaving you confused as to how far back you need to track in order to make sure you're in the right path. You, chapter 1. In each chapter, the wrong ends can contain a variety of pleasant deaths, such as getting buried alive, eating your best friend, or swallowing a pair of scissors somehow. Most of these wrong ends are a byproduct of forgetting to do something in the game. For example, in chapter 1, in order to complete the level, you need to enter a specific classroom that requires a key that can be found in a completely random staircase. When you enter the classroom, you need to read the newspaper that's found inside. The game tries to take you for a schmuck and constantly ask you, do you really want to read the newspaper? Do you really want to? Do you? Your whole family could die if you read it. You still want to read it, you maniac. F it. Fine. After reading through the newspaper, you just play through the rest of the chapter like you normally would, and you would get the true ending, which involves Seiko hanging herself in the girl's bathroom stall. Or did she? If you don't read the newspaper and continue playing as normal, you get the same ending, but after the event, the three ghosts that are haunting the school materialize behind you and force you to swallow a pair of scissors. And this counts as a wrong end. Why? As the game progresses, you get more and more ways you could land your heroes in trouble and gift them a bad ending. This mechanic is there to keep you on your feet and ensure that you search every nook and cranny that the game has to offer. Although you're not supposed to examine everything the game has to offer because that could land you in a bad end as well. Scattered around the school are victims' memoirs, the dying words of a character in the game. And even though the game warned you earlier not to read all the victims' memoirs, with the amount of bull the game's pulled on you thus far, you'd want to read all of them out of morbid curiosity. You read through all of them and things turn out fine and nothing happens. Just kidding! A cutscene is automatically triggered. Turns out you were the writer of the victim's memoir and now you're living through the nightmare that you have written for yourself. Wrong end, try again, bitch. No, but wait, you actually need to get all the wrong ends to 100% the game, so technically you should read all the victims' memoirs was anyway. In the final chapter of the game, things get even worse when you can trigger a path to a wrong end extremely early on in the chapter, but you don't realize it until the very end of the chapter. Allowing Yuka to get caught by Yuya automatically triggers a wrong end that you won't know is a wrong end until a full hour and a half of gameplay, filled with many plot holes because the developers didn't have the foresight to write that much dialogue with one character missing. Trust me, I wouldn't write for that either, just keep the plot holes. Moving back to the story real quick, and I don't want to make this video a plot summary of all the games, so I'll make it brief. When you play through each of the characters, you gain control of a new group of people depending on which parallel universe they landed in. In chapter 1, you're with Naomi and Seiko. In chapter 2, you're with Yoshiki and Ayumi, with Miss Yui for about 3 seconds before she splits up and Kama serves her for not following the creepypasta code. In chapter 3, you're with Satoshi and Yuka and Morishige and Mayu. But this is a funny little chapter because you meet Naomi and Seiko's dead body, then get sent back into the dimension with Ayumi and Yoshiki away from Yuka. But then a chapter later, all of the paths start to converge and you're kinda all together at chapter 5, or at least the surviving members, to get through the rest of the story. Holy shit, I haven't even talked about what happens to some of the members. So basically, Seiko dies because she has an argument with Naomi, and then Naomi gets possessed by a thing called the Darkening, which is used as a plot device in the first game, but a game mechanic in the later games in the series. Anyway, the Darkening compels her to tie a noose around Seiko's neck and kill her dead. In chapter 2, Mayu talks to 2 of the ghosts that were trapped in Heavenly Host and feels a lot of empathy for them to the point that she wants to stay there forever. But then Ayumi and Yoshiki use the doll that you find earlier in the chapter to roast the shit out of the ghosts, and they don't take no shit from a bunch of school kids, so they grab Mayu and yeet her at a wall, causing her to explode into pieces. Later in the game, turns out Morishige has a borderline fetish with Guro as he's snapping up pictures of all the dead bodies around the school. Then he unknowingly takes a special interest in a very big gory patch on the wall. It's Mayu. And he goes batshit crazy and he dies, I think. In the final chapter, Miss Yui sacrifices herself to save Ayumi and falls down into a void and takes a lot of damage and dies. Then in the final chapter, it turns out that the person that was giving you hints throughout the game and Ayumi's idol is a pathological liar and manipulator. Who knew? Oops. So then you tell her exactly what she did and roast her so hard she vomits ink and dies again. And now you have to do the Sachiko ever after chamber actually properly, and you do it and make it out alive, but everyone who died in the school gets erased from existence. The end. In CPBCRF, this also marks the first game in which a new strand of virus has taken control over a few of the characters, which goes by the name of Corona Dumbass Syndrome, which is a very lethal virus that causes the people affected to make decisions that are so incredibly stupid, almost as stupid as running Cyberpunk on a PS3. Most of the incredibly dumb decisions are all the fault of Yuka and the writer's barely disguised fetish. You will notice in the Corpse Party franchise that a suspiciously large number of characters that just so happen to all be young girls tend to have an incessant need to want to use a lavatory. And the game manages to make almost an entire chapter about this plot point with Yuka. In the 3rd chapter of the game, she asks Satoshi to use the bathroom, and as you explore the school, you find that you cannot go in any of the stalls in the game. You'd expect Yuka to just say sod it and do it in the corner while Satoshi isn't looking, or in the empty bucket that you pass by multiple times throughout the game, but no! Yuka decides to hold it until they find a working toilet. Spoiler alert, they do not, and she decides to do it outside of the building. The same building that changes hallways and rearranges itself when you pass by a specific area. This causes Satoshi and Yuka to get separated, and she is eventually stalked by one of the main antagonists of the franchise, Yuya Kizami, in one of the longest chase sequences in the entire game. And as mentioned before, if you get caught, you land yourself in a wrong end and she dies, all because she refused to just do it in a corner. Believe it or not, this isn't the first time this happens in the Corpse Party franchise, and it certainly will not be the last, as you'll soon find out. The gameplay in CPBCRF is pretty much almost identical to the original Corpse Party, but now the developers had the time and the money to work on the imperfections present in the first game. For example, none of the characters have magical powers anymore. Like, that's such a stupid decision to the story. Imagine the regular human characters having magical powers. It would instantly make the game not scary or interesting. In fact, the only RPG element that's present in the game is the health system, and that's not even used much in the game at all. Every ghost counter in the game is an instant death if they catch you. The only time this is remotely relevant is in the first chapter in the infirmary, where Seiko leaves you alone to get attacked by a black sheep. Getting touched by this mist doesn't instantly kill you, but it drains your HP, and if you let your HP drop all the way down to 0, it triggers another wrong end. As well as the 3 ghosts that chase you, you are also chased by a former teacher in the school who's been killed and reanimated as a huge hulking zombie that wields nothing but a big hammer and a big mouth. The good thing about Corpse Party is that it gives you time and space to explore the school and the surrounding areas, giving you time to look look at random dead bodies sprawled around the school, with them containing name tags that tell you the school they're from and their name, and sometimes having extra dialogue giving the player some information as to how they died. And this game loves to give victims the slow, agonizing deaths that they really don't deserve. What the hell, developer? CPBCRF got many releases throughout its lifetime, almost equaling FIFA and Skyrim with the amount of different versions for each console or device or anything that we can play the game on. Being released in its alpha stages on PC first, then with patched in voice acting on the PSP, then finished on the PC after the PSP released, then ported on iOS in 2012, fixing a bunch of other things and patching one of the ghosts so it's more obvious what actually happened to her in Heavenly Host that caused half her head to be missing. In 2016, Nintendo wanted their mitts on the Corpse Party franchise. They felt cute and wanted to traumatize some kids, so Corpse Party was also released on the 3DS, with a back-to-school edition that I waited 2 whole months to arrive, and it never did. Thanks, DPD. The back-to-school edition contained figurines and an art book, and stands as the only way a Westerner could actually get a physical copy of Corpse Party. And right now, as it stands, the 3DS version of the game is the definitive way to play the game, with complete voice acting, fixed character sprites. Ayumi's hair was brown instead of blue on all versions of Corpse Party up until now. No idea how the developers overlooked this glaring mistake, but oh well. Remastered music and some more extra chapters that you could play for some more context to the Corpse Party lore. Until it took so long for me to work on this video that the developers announced yet another version of CPBCRF for the Nintendo Switch and the PS4 that will include updated sprites and voice acting for every extra chapter in the game as well. Can you guys see how much suffering I'm going through for this one video? Any new fan that wants to get acquainted with the Heavenly Host lore will definitely have to play this game first, as this is by far the most important game of the franchise and a very influential horror game that is up there with some of the greatest that the franchise has to offer, especially for gory horror. As for a game that had its roots in RPG Maker, it's extremely effective at unnerving the player, and it's probably one of the most well fleshed out games that the engine has to offer, with its humble beginnings in 1998 to present day being nothing short of inspiring for budding horror writers and developers around the world. But of course, with something this successful, it's ripe to be milked. And milked it was. If there's ever a proper case of sequelitis in the gaming industry, Corpse Party is one of them, because with how complete the original game is, there really shouldn't have been so many sequels, spin-offs and adaptations, but here we are. The first game got adapted into several manga adaptations, and they are all alternate versions of the first game and its many endings. The Blood Covered and the Book of Shadows manga are the most well-known adaptations of the source material and are pretty solid retellings of the original game, with more character-to-character moments and a more streamlined story that doesn't rely on the game's meandering throughout its over 8-hour runtime. There's also another adaptation of the original game this time named Musume, released in 2010, and it's well, it tries to mix the bare bones plot of the original PC-98 game, which wasn't much to begin with the plot of its remake, and what comes out of it is an attempt to mix ecchi with the grisly murders that happened in the first game, which already is a major red flag. But then the final chapter makes things worse by turning into a hentai and including some really messed up endings to boot. Now, you'd think that this is some screwed up fanfiction and the developers of the original game wrote it off as a shameful smearing of their work, but then you check the writer of the manga and... On the moving picture side of things, an OVA of Corpse Party was released in 2013 titled Tortured Souls, and this was actually a lot of people's introduction to the Corpse Party franchise. If this was your introduction to this entire franchise, I'm so sorry. I'm not going to go into detail about the plot because I already did it when I covered the game, but the important part of the anime is that it tried to condense an almost 10-hour game full of many character interactions and lore into a 2-hour OVA, and because of this, the anime skips a lot of story that will leave you confused the more the episodes go on, with an okay opening episode focusing on Naomi and Seiko and their attempts to escape the school, with some fan service in between. As the series continues though, it neglects to mention a lot of the background information about the school and its rules, assuming the people who are watching the anime have already played the game. One thing that was really annoying as I watched the anime was that it really loved using the Dutch angle every time something scary was supposed to happen, which took me right out of the scares and made the anime much more fun to watch when I set up a viewing party of the entire OVA, and we ended up getting distracted and tried to guess in which direction the camera would rotate like we were watching Battlefield Earth. Since the anime has to blitz through the story and go through a more unique ending that actually isn't in any of the games, the deaths in the anime are also really funny, with the anime going the Musume route and including some panty shots of our characters just as they're about to get brutally murdered. Or straight up speedrunning their deaths like Ms. Yui. In the game, she made a heroic sacrifice to save one of her students from falling to their death, whereas in the anime... The anime is a bit of a mess, but it's the easiest way to consume Corpse Party content without having to get too invested in the multitude of ports, remakes, and remasters of the original game. Just don't expect anything mind-blowing and you'll have a much better time trying to watch it. The milking of the first game doesn't even end there, as in 2015, a live-action adaptation was made of Corpse Party, and instead of taking the cues from the game, they decided to use the anime as the adaptation source, which was already a red flag, but now they had even less time to cram the content of the game into it, with only an hour and a half, meaning that characters that are in all adaptations of the game aren't even in the film, and all the deaths in the film are extremely quick, which if anything is a mercy compared to what they have to deal with in the game. I would go into detail about the live action film and its sequel, Book of Shadows, but I feel like that's worth another entire video as it is a doozy. It's actually insane how many adaptations of the original source material there are, and this all started from a game that didn't even get first place in the competition that it was submitted for. That is a flex and a half. Imagine making this empire of content and you ended up more successful than the person that initially beat you in the competition. Now, as I said a couple of minutes earlier, with the success of the first game, the franchise was bound to be milked, and it was milked to hell and back. Not just with the anime adaptations, but several sequels and spin-offs were made to the original game, the first of which being Corpse Party Book of Shadows was released internationally in 2013 for the PSP again, and things get a little easier from here on out, I hope. The entire premise of Book of Shadows makes this game seem more like a DLC than anything, similar to games such as Red Dead Redemption Undead Nightmare, which was an expansion to Red Dead Redemption. Book of Shadows essentially continues on from one of the endings from CPBCRF, in which during the final chapter of the game, if you choose not to read all 5 notes from Naho's notebook and continue the game as normal, the game ends as normal and you successfully do the charm to send you back home. Satoshi wakes up with no memory of going home after the events of the first game and heads to school, only to realize that everyone who died a gruesome, lonely death in the first game is alive and well, and everything is a-okay. Just kidding! Satoshi is in a Groundhog Day loop. He is the only one who knows what occurs in the first game, and they're about to do it all over again unless Satoshi can stop them from doing it. Spoiler alert, he doesn't, and they have to do it all over again. Honestly, if I was Satoshi, I just wouldn't have joined in. Let them deal with it themselves. Imagine trusting someone who gets their information from an occult blog online. So that I say, let them die. Anyways, the game is structured very weirdly compared to the other games in the series, acting like a complete visual novel and ditching the RPG elements that the Corpse Party franchise was known and loved for. In lieu of the RPG elements, Book of Shadows decides to become an old flash point-and-click adventure game, where the extent of the gameplay is just moving your mouse around the screen and hoping something happens when you click on something. The bulk of the game is pretty much a visual novel, and you don't even need to do anything for the majority of the game. You could just pull a Raid Shadow Legends and have everything auto-play for you. Get some snacks and popcorn and let the events of the game play out right in front of you. When you're doing the Ace Attorney point-and-click adventure type gameplay, however, you're basically at the mercy of the game, as the only clues you really have are the character you're playing as claiming that there's something in the room that you're supposed to collect to advance the story. If you have to meet someone in the game will take your hands off the keyboard and initiate an extremely long cutscene in which the extent of your gamer activity would just be pressing space over and over again. Aren't visual novels fun? I joke about all of this, but there is at least one gameplay feature designed to keep you on your toes so you don't completely fall asleep while playing the game, and that's the darkening meter. Remember that thing that was only fleetingly mentioned in the first game? Well, it's back in this one, and it's a game mechanic now. The darkening meter is pretty much your character's sanity meter, and looking at things that you might consider a little spooky will cause that meter to go up. And in the extremely unlikely case that the darkening meter hits 100%, you get a wrong end. But there are points where you need to grind wrong ends that require you to do this in order to get 100% completion. And let me tell you, you have to be extremely bad at the game in order to let your darkening meter hit 100%. You will never hit 100% darkening level if you're playing through the game normally, and the only way in which you can actively grind the meter out is by looking at corpses in the school that have name tags, because knowing that some of the skeletons that are on the floor have names makes things infinitely more scary. The completion requirements for this game don't just end there. In the original version of the game on PSP, in order to unlock the final chapter of the game, which is the only chapter that actually advances the story, you have to play through the game and get every single ending that the game has to offer, including all the wrong ends, which totals to 33 endings, each with their own unique roots and dialogue. This task would be incredibly daunting, but the developers were nice enough to allow you to port your save data from the first game into the game files for Book of Shadows. If you played through the first game, the requirement to unlock the final final chapter is shortened to just getting the true ending of every chapter beforehand, which is still a long and daunting task. The lack of actual gameplay in Book of Shadows is kind of saved by the story that the game has to tell. The game acts as a prequel, midquel, alternate universe sequel all at the same time, with the game acting as an anthology documenting the events during the first game, some of which taking place in an alternate time loop based on the wrong end that kicks things off in the first game, and others taking place beforehand, giving more context behind certain characters' action in CPBCRF. The game also introduces some new characters to add to the mix. Well, I say new, what the game actually did was give some more context behind some of the dead bodies that you find in discard in the main game, the most significant one being Sayaka Ue, best friends with Naho Sainoki, the person who basically caused the events of the first game by lying about the summon ritual. Sayaka has a dedicated chapter about her antics with Naho leading up to her untimely death in the first game, and that's pretty much it for her character development. But don't worry, she gets more in the spin-offs of the game. As for the rest of the chapters of the game, they essentially serve as a pseudo DLC to the main game, giving characters like Ms. Yui more characterization that wasn't there in CPBCRF, and Morishige, who didn't have much to work with in the first game, getting a dedicated chapter that takes place at the same time as the main game. An interesting thing to note before moving forward, the talk of alternate time loops is actually going to be an extremely important point, as you will find out in chapter 1, other characters actually start realizing that they're stuck in a loop. For example, chapter 1 follows Naomi and Seiko again, and the story goes along as normal, but Naomi starts to realize that the events of the first chapter have happened before, including the infamous argument that caused Seiko to split from her in the first place. She tries to rectify the mistakes she made in shouting at Seiko in the first place, but the curse of the school prevents her from doing anything about it, electing to have her chuck some hair up out of her mouth. After realizing what's about to happen to Seiko, she manages to prevent it from taking place and save Seiko from a Sayori cosplay. However, if you remember from the first game, it was actually a possessed Naomi that caused Seiko to be in that position in the first place. So after Naomi saves Seiko, she understandably freaks out and runs away, only to fall down the stairs and... It's then discovered that Sachiko knows that this entire thing is a time loop and lets Naomi and the audience know that everyone who died in the first game will continue to die over and over again in worse ways every time. This notion is extremely important to remember because future Corpse Party games bring this up over and over again as a reminder. This chapter is also a massive point of contention among the fanbase because most of the fans were expecting something different to happen this time around. Seiko is probably one of the most punished characters in the entire franchise because she gets little to no character development and dies in the very first chapter of both games. At least in Book of Shadows, there was a little bit of backstory before the events of the game, but the fans were left wanting more than just having her die again in a more brutal way. The Corona Dumbass Syndrome makes a return in this game in the very next chapter, and this time Mayu is the victim. She realizes immediately that she's in a time loop and surprisingly does the right thing and refuses to enter the room that sealed her fate in the original game. As you progress through the chapter, Mayu realizes there's a large mark on her stomach and decides to not tell anyone about it. For what purpose? She finds another character with Yoshiki named Nana, and she has similar markings on her legs. At the end of the chapter, Nana's legs are chopped off at the same area that they were marked, and Mayu's worried that a similar thing will happen to her. So she panics and runs into Ayumi and Yoshiki, who ask her about what just happened. You'd think that Mayu will tell them everything and stick by them while they try to find clues, because being alone in a place like Heavenly Host is a very, very bad idea. But no! In a move that can be only described as genius, Mayu runs off alone into the school because she is so narcissistic that she didn't want anyone to see her seemingly ugly face. She runs until she can find a room to hide her scars with makeup, and she eventually finds one. The same room that she refused to enter in the beginning of the chapter because she knew it would be certain death. And you can probably guess what happens to her in that room. A complete and utter idiot! Going back to the gameplay, and one thing that's introduced in Book of Shadows in lieu of proper gameplay is the addition of 3D sound. The game's budget has to go somewhere, so the voice actors and actresses all recorded around a dummy head microphone used a lot by ASMR channels, and there are points in which it seems like you are listening to an ASMR recording, especially around chapter 2 where a possessed Ayumi does this. The game also has a feature called an EVP machine, which allows you to use the voice clips in the game and play around with them however you see fit. This game marked a very big franchise shift because the developers decided that they wanted to be private school English literature teachers and bombard players with supplementary material that wasn't just the original games. Just playing through the game isn't enough anymore because now you needed to also do your own research into the lore of the franchise. And this is especially notable in the 4th chapter of the game where you're following Naho and Sayaka, and there's a lot of backstory as to how the events of the first game came to be, with the most important part of that chapter showing the steps that Naho took to post the incorrect information about how to get to Heavenly Host on her blog. In Book of Shadows, the supplementary material wasn't exactly required, but as you'll soon find out, this gets so much worse as the series continues. Now remember how I said that the game is pretty much an anthology of content surrounding the events of the first game? The game doesn't have anything going for it in terms of story progression, stuffing these anthologies together into one semi-coherent mess of content that Corpse Party fans would love, but ultimately feeling like an extended DLC to the main game. That is until the infamous final chapter named Blood Drive. Naomi and Ayumi go over to a haunted mansion in a forest in the country of nowhere middle of in order to find answers about Heavenly Host, and in the mansion they come across a book of shadows. They said the thing! They said the thing! Ayumi decides to use her YouTube knowledge once again to try the impossible and bring some of the dead characters back, and she tries it with Mayu first. It seems to work, but then all of a sudden the cursed book kills Mayu even more than she's already been killed, which is a bit overkill if you ask me. After making light work of Mayu, the book decides to punish Ayumi as well, and Naomi tries to help. Kinda, but you should know by now that just putting water on a flame will make things worse. Just when all hope seems lost, Ayumi's sister comes out of absolutely nowhere, like she had to be Wonder Woman or something. Ayumi and Naomi literally drove out to the middle of nowhere. How did she arrive just at the right time and the right place? Anyway, she saves Ayumi and everything seems fine, but then... and the game ends there. The game actually ends at this point. Imagine going through all of that and now you have to wait for the next installment of the franchise. It looks like it's coming out in a year. Maybe we'll get some answers then. Here we go. Wait, what? Corpse Party 2U, also known as New Super Mario Corpse Party Smash Bros. Country, Sweet Sachiko's Hysterical Birthday Bash Deluxe Edition and Knuckles featuring Dante from Devil May Cry, was released on August 2nd, 2012 in Japan for the PSP once again, and this game, if you can even call it that, is a completely different experience to the other games in the franchise. This game is pretty much Corpse Party's answers to Carnival Phantasm, where they take a super serious franchise full of death, destruction, blood, sweat, tears, piss, and put it through Pyrovision. In the game, Sachiko Shinozaki, the mastermind behind Heavenly Host, realizes that out of all the time loops that every character has gone through from Book of Shadows, this specific day is her birthday. So in preparation, she revives every character in the Corpse Party franchise, including some new ones that we'd never even seen before, so that they can all celebrate her birthday with her. Failure to do so would land them a very painful death. That's the entire premise. In terms of gameplay, there really isn't much to write home about, as the game is a visual novel through and through, only requiring you to press A on your controller and sometimes waking you up by forcing you to make a choice to advance the game. Because of this, there's not much to talk about here, but one thing I wanted to mention before moving on to the big event is the fact that the game introduces characters that most people casually playing the games probably would never have heard of, but they will be important when talking about Blood Drive, and they are Aiko Niwa, who's pretty much a personified paranormal proxy to the sun, is a rival of Naho and Sayaka, and introduced in a spin-off light novel called Cemetery Zero. This is where the supplementary reading part of Corpse Party comes into effect, because the game expects you to know who these people are before playing. There's Inumaru, who has a massive crush on Sayaka and is one of Nao's classmates. And finally, there's Satsuki, Yuka's friend from school, who was actually going to be the protagonist of the cancelled sequel to the original Corpse Party game I mentioned in the beginning of the video, titled Satsuki's Heart. In general, Corpse Party 2U is one of those games that relies a lot on tropes usually seen in anime rom-coms, with each of the chapter titles parodying phrases from popular media. media. There are absolutely no investigation areas in this game like in Book of Shadows, and to the surprise of absolutely no one, the game did not sell well in the West when it got a translation from Xseed Games, released on PC in 2019. But now that you know about the new characters in the franchise, I guess it's time to talk about the big one, the grand finale of the Heavenly Host saga, and the game that pretty much ruined the franchise past the point of no return. I'm not even joking when I say that this game is probably one of the most painful games I've ever had to play for this channel, and I don't mean that lightly. So before I continue, I'm going to have to ask you guys to take a seat for this one because it's an absolute doozy. The year is 2014. The world got an exclusive early access look at a global pandemic simulator and were offered a tutorial on how to deal with it quickly, preparing them for any future cases. Scotland tried to escape from the UK, but everyone else was having none of it, and an entire plane got uninstalled from existence. In the midst of all of this chaos, Kedwin and co got together to finish the Heavenly Host saga that he had begun several years in adaptations prior to that moment. But not before deciding to work on a brand new game that's set in the future way after the events of this one, which I will get into later. Corpse Party Blood Drive was released on July 24th, 2014 and was released on the PS Vita. I mean, the console needed to have at least something to play. Blood Drive sets out to conclude the story started by CPBCRF and continued in the similarly named final chapter of Book of Shadows, and it does so in it definitely completes the story, I guess. The game decides to ditch the pixel RPG Maker-like aesthetic that was shown in detail with the original game and shown partially in Book of Shadows, opting to go the itch.io game route and use Unity for the duration of the game's development in order to have the game displayed in 3D. Because I wasn't able to snag a PS Vita to record this game with myself, the footage you are seeing and will be seeing throughout the duration of the game will be from the PC release of the game, released on October 10th, 2019. However, this doesn't mean to say that I won't be mentioning the absolute state the game runs on in every other platform that isn't the highest quality SSD you can find on Newegg. Upon playing the game, you will already notice a very big difference in style to the previous games. Everything looks hyper-realistic! The game takes notes from everyone's favorite creepypastas and decides to present everything in hyper-realistic 3D. It's like they knew exactly how to scare the pants off their player base. The only problem with this design choice is the fact that there are moments in the game where the 3D nature is a very big detriment to the gameplay, especially on the PS Vita. For some reason, the developers thought that mobile devices at the time of release would all run on RTX 3090s, so throughout the game, when you walk into a new room or a new corridor, the entire area is rendered in one go, as opposed to slowly loading in chunks like you are abusing Elytras in creative mode and destroying Microsoft servers. Because of this, there are a lot of loading screens. An awful lot of them. It doesn't help that the loading screens look like straight up nightmare diesel and show this while you're attempting to progress to the next area, and the loading screens are ridiculously long. It's still loading? You'd think that these loading screens only show up when you're progressing to a completely new level in the game, or maybe even a new chapter, but they show up every single door you walk through. And speaking of doors, unlike the previous games where doors that you don't need to enter are sealed completely, with text outright saying that it looks like they've been molded into the wall, the devs kind of forgot to lock some of them, electing to have almost every single door in Heavenly Host be wide open even if they contain just a singular battery or a bandage, adding a lot of dead playtime to the game. This doesn't even scratch the surface of what the devs did this time around to screw with the user experience. In Blood Drive, there are little to no actual puzzles that you need to solve like in the original game, ditching at least some of the fun parts of the games and replacing them with just going from one checkpoint to another, collecting items in a specific room at a specific time while avoiding things around the school. And there are a lot of things that you need to avoid this time around to the point where it's actually ridiculous, but I'll get to that later. I've said that way too many times. When you do eventually find the item that is required for you to progress the story, instead of the game automatically choosing the relevant item for you in your inventory, like in all other games of the series, Blood Drive adds an extra step by making you choose the item that you want to use for no reason except for one specific part of the game, where choosing the incorrect item nets you a wrong end. As it's a franchise staple, the wrong end system returns in this game with a vengeance. and a significant downgrade as the previous Corpse Party games had lots of effort put into the wrong end, with CGs done for most of them. But this time, around 90% of the wrong ends that happen in this game are extremely quick and don't even have descriptions for them, for better and for worse, instead letting the chibi animations do the talking, which leads to some unintentionally hilarious deaths in the game, especially in the latter half, where you'll find yourself dying for dumber and dumber reasons as you continue through the game, which leads into yet another issue that Blood Drive has, which is the enemy and danger system. Littered throughout the school are random tripwires, glass shards, and sharp planks on the floor, and if you step on the shards and planks at any given moment, you take damage. When I was playing through the game, I also found that there are moments where the game doesn't even know when the characters are supposed to be hurt by the environment, as I was running through the hallways and there are random moments where your character will take damage from literally nothing. The tripwires are a callback to the very first chapter in Book of Shadows, and they make a return as a lethal reminder not to run in the halls or in the classrooms, as they are placed everywhere around the school and require you to manually disarm them. Failure to do so will cause you to take a lot of damage when you trip over them, which is all well and good. But then another game mechanic swoops in to ruin your day even more, and that's the fact that the school is extremely dark. But don't worry! The game at least prepares you for that fact by equipping all characters present with a torch. That seems to run on the world's worst battery. This forces you to have to scour the school looking for batteries hidden in rooms and corridors so you can keep your torch lit. In later patches of the game, an infinite power option was added to allow players to not have to worry about looking for batteries, and instead worry about finding bandages to heal your character after taking damage. As the game progresses and you have more and more characters join your party from the story, you can instantly switch characters with a keybind.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
And the active character will be the one to take damage should you get hurt. So if you find yourself in danger of dying, you're just one keybind away from rescuing your playthrough. Can I also just mention that on the PC version of the game, they don't even have any controller binding set at all to begin with, forcing me to have to set all of the buttons myself. And they didn't even display properly when I needed them. I haven't even gotten to the enemies in this game. Isn't Blood Drive so fun? Littered throughout the game at completely random intervals are phantoms who, when spawned, will chase the player down everywhere, including loading areas. Because of this, in order to evade phantoms, you need to find a cupboard to hide in like it's Amnesia all over again, and you must wait for them to leave. But the trouble doesn't end there. If the phantoms see you entering the cupboard, they just pull you right out and beat you to death. The only way to evade the phantoms is by using talismans that are littered throughout the school, which will cause the phantoms to disappear completely. Although I wouldn't even say completely, because if you load in a save or you return to the area where the phantoms spawn, there is a small chance that the game will just spawn them right back in, sending you on another chase sequence and wasting another talisman. Without that item, you are pretty much screwed, and there's also a chance that multiple phantoms can spawn, trapping you and killing you. However, you can game the system by quitting the game if you feel like you're in trouble and just loading back the save, which will return the enemies back to their spawn point even if you save the game right next to one. You could also game the system by initiating a cutscene mid-chase, as that seems to despawn the enemies somehow. Phantoms would not be as bad if they were easy to evade, but they aren't, as they keep pace with the player and sometimes are faster. And in Blood Drive, you now have to worry about stamina, because if you're running for too long, you will start to slow down, and if you completely run out of stamina, you stop moving entirely to catch your breath for an undisclosed amount of time, which would be extremely frustrating if you were mid-chase. As well as the phantoms, you also encounter these pyramid head knockoffs, who aren't really explained in the story and are just a B-Tech Yoshikazu, only existing to give you a challenge in chapter 4 where you have to dodge their axe swings for 60 seconds. You'd think this would be fairly difficult, yes? You can just walk the entire time and not get hurt at all. In Blood Drive, they decided to mix the gameplay elements with Book of Shadows' visual novel style, and the way in which they did this also served to completely tank the pacing of the game, with some chapters having over 40 minutes of dialogue only for 5 minutes of walking from destination to destination, followed by another half hour of speaking. Sometimes the game even switches from the visual novel style to the in-game 3D chibi style for the cutscenes, and this makes the pacing even worse, because the animations between lines are extremely cookie cutter and are unskippable. Did I also mention that there's no way to pause the game while these cutscenes are happening? You basically have to ride it out for what could be 40 minutes before you're given control back and you can save the game. But you can't even save the game! To make matters even worse, you cannot save at any point anymore. Instead, you are required to save at Ayumi's candles that she's placed in the school, meaning that at some point of the game, you may even have to find one of the candles before you can even save. It kind of feels like the developers went out of their way to make the most frustrating game ever, which is a shame since this game was marketed as the grand finale of the franchise. And I've talked about all of this so far without even mentioning the story once, which is a testament to just how frustrating the game has been to play. So I guess I should stop stalling and try and talk about some of the things that were wrong with the story of the game. If ever there was an example of a game jumping the shark, this game not only jumped it, but brutalized it and killed its family. This game has ventured so far away from Corpse Party that it founded a new country and called it Tales of Symphonia. The story completely does away with absolutely everything that made Corpse Party as successful and beloved as it was, and turns it into a generic fantasy story, which is such a shame because the very beginning of the game showed some promising aspects. After the events of Book of Shadows, Ayumi is so riddled with guilt at the fact that every single bad thing that's ever happened in the game is her fault, and wallows in self-pity for several months. This is until we are introduced to a new character for this game named Misuto, who is a potty-mouthed delinquent who looks so out of place in the entire game that you'd think he's literally an anime cliche parody. He tells Ayumi that there is a way to get back into Heavenly Host to retrieve the Book of Shadows after she is shown an image of one of the ghosts from the first game holding it inside the school. After asking Yoshiki for help in her endeavors, Yoshiki does the smartest thing possible and throws the stones that would be used to get to the school out the window and under a steamroller, stating that going back to that cursed school without a plan would be suicide. After having a mental breakdown and finding the stones completely unharmed a few minutes later, Ayumi is met once again by Misuto, who tells her that it's time to go! Yoshiki tries to stop them, but Misuto yeets him against the wall, severely injuring him. Now at this point, what do you think Ayumi does next? A. Check on Yoshiki to see if he's okay after that shove. B. Call out Misuto for hurting a friend. C. Put this visit on hold so she can think of a plan of action before going back to Heavenly Host, since every time she went anywhere without a plan it ended in disaster. Or D. All of the above. If you chose any of the answers, you would be so wrong! She decides to go to Heavenly Host with a complete stranger who invaded her room twice. One of the times while she was in the bath, had absolutely no evidence to back a single shred of intel he was saying, had an attitude that literally tipped him off as the villain from the first 2 sentences he says in the whole game, and has done absolutely nothing to gain her trust whatsoever. A complete and utter pillock. Because of her absolutely boneheaded decision, she is left alone once again in Heavenly Host, and is immediately chased by Mayu's murderous spirit that relentlessly chases you when you take control of her, and can brutally kill you. And what makes things even worse is that Misuto is the main villain for the game, who uses Ayumi to make his own Book of Shadows that he uses to destroy all of her friends halfway through the game. In short, the entire plot of the game would have been prevented if Ayumi didn't make a string of really fucking terrible decisions. It also doesn't help that literally every single new character in Blood Drive is extremely unlikable, like Magari, who is also a walking anime cliche parody, and wants the Book of Shadows for her own personal reasons. The game also retroactively ruins the original by completely removing all agency from Sachiko herself. In the original game, it was her hatred and curse that caused Heavenly Host to exist in the first place, but in Blood Drive, nope! Heavenly Host wasn't her doing whatsoever, it was the work of those pesky witches from centuries ago. Then they decide to one-up that twist by introducing yet another twist that Sachiko had an unborn twin sister named Sachi, creative name, I know, that was never mentioned in any previous game or supplementary material. The tone of this game is shot completely to hell, which is a damn shame because the Corpse Party franchise deserved so much more than this. The tightly knit gory horror plot is abandoned in the very first chapter, and it is replaced with the most generic save the world story that doesn't differentiate Blood Drive from any of the other cliched RPG games out there. I knew I was in for a long few hours when the first chapter of the game had one of the new characters, Kuoniwa, deliver expensive lunch to Satoshi in a bloody helicopter that she bought from a massive company that she's also the CEO of. This game is doing my head in! As the game continues, more and more characters are forced into Heavenly Host in a weird Romeo and Juliet conundrum, where new characters go there willingly to meet with other characters that are trying to leave or have already left. And now everyone is stuck in the school with no way out because an antagonist has either yoinked their escape plan or they randomly lose it. Which leads to another example of the writer's barely disguised fetish, as the school is now covered in flesh mounds. The game warns you not to step in any of them because at any point, tentacles could rise from them and capture you, severely denting your darkening. Oh yeah, I forgot the darkening's a thing as well. Hidden around the school are statues that you can use only once to cure all the darkening within your characters, which mind you, isn't even displayed in the pause menu like their HP is. And that's not the only thing that has changed about Heavenly Host. Now there's a gym! This was retconned into existence in Corpse Party 2U, where most of the plot takes place. And in chapter 4, there's a huge glob of ice cream that's just randomly in the middle of the gym. Ayumi and Yoshiki go and investigate and find out that one of the pillars that you need to look for to advance the plot are there. Ayumi goes forward and collects the pillar at the top of the ice cream, but then hands slowly start dragging her in, accompanied by... This is not edited, by the way. This is exactly how it sounds in the game. The audio mixing in this game is absolutely awful too, with several moments in the game where you could hear the audio start to distort from how artificially loud they made some of the voice lines and the music. And special mention goes to chapter 6, where halfway through the chapter, the music returns with a vengeance. What the fuck? Imagine trying to play this game on the PS Vita in the middle of the night when you're supposed to be asleep. Parents around the world will be using this game to catch people out for not revising for their test tomorrow. Going back to the story, and after the halfway point where every character is seemingly dead at Misuto's hands, it seems the entire world is going down the toilet, with corpses partying amongst the living to a ridiculous extent. That is, until Ayumi realizes that the truth was inside of her all along. I'm not even joking. The Book of Shadows that she spent half the game looking for turned out to be inside her stomach of all places, and she has to cut it out in order to retrieve the book. I wish I was making this up. How did she not notice an entire book inside her stomach this whole time? Anyway, she gets the book and goes with Sachiko back to Heavenly Host. Sachiko rewinds time to before the events of the previous chapter, which costs her all her life points and she dies. But everyone else is back alive, and this time Ayumi has the book, which allows her to subdue Misuto and stop the apocalypse, and they all live happily ever after. Just kidding. Mistletoe eventually breaks free and tries to run away, but in yet another twist, Satsuki, who had been kicked down the stairs earlier in the game and completely shattered her face, is suddenly alive again. And she's been watching a bit too much Parasite because her head explodes into a flower and bites Misuto's head off. What? What just happened? What just happened? What is this game? Anyway, now the main villain is dead, but there's still over an hour of gameplay left, so what do we do now? Yep, that's right. Introduce an even greater scale villain at the last second and have a Pokemon battle with her, which requires you to study 5 items that you receive at the end of the game like you're studying for a verbal reasoning test in hieroglyphics. Right before the battle, you also have to go through a maze, and you have to be very wary not to alert these pyramid head knockoffs of your existence, or else you could get easily trapped and receive a game over. Now, after all I've said so far, you're probably expecting the best and most satisfying ending to a video game since beating Minecraft on hardcore mode blindfolded. I mean, you've gone through hell and back to get to the final moments of the entire Heavenly Host saga, so surely you get a satisfying conclusion, especially seeing as the game's marketing and plot was based on the notion that the characters that died in the first game could and will get revived, right? Yeah, I don't even have the energy to tell you that you're wrong. After the battle with Queen, Ayumi has lost an eye and she has decided to take it upon herself to seal the entirety of Heavenly Host within her body, to the behest of all the other characters. Yoshiki makes a split decision to stay with Ayumi, while all the other surviving characters escape the school back into reality. As a result, instead of the characters who died in Heavenly Host not existing at all, they are cosmically retconned to exist again. But they're still dead. And now Ayumi and Yoshiki have completely been wiped from the surviving characters' memories. And not just that, Ayumi is now pretty much a Cyclops vegetable, although Yoshiki eventually finds a house to probably take care of her. Still, not a good way to go. And to make matters even worse, Heavenly Host is not even permanently sealed away, because when Ayumi dies, the whole thing starts over again, which renders the entire Heavenly Host saga an absolute waste of time and space. I am almost impressed with how much Blood Drive retroactively ruined the franchise. I can't even make a joke about it. The first game was fantastic gory horror, and by the end of the saga, we're just left with nothing. I know it sounds like I've been ranting at this point, but it genuinely feels like there's nothing good to mention about this game. At least the characterization's mostly intact, I guess. It just feels like Kedwin was in over his head this time around and wanted to make a grand story full of death and mass destruction, but realized that there's not much that can be done with the premise of one relatively small school, so there had to be retcons and rewrites in order to capture a new audience. Because of this, Blood Drive suffers heavily in terms of trying to understand its own tone and what type of game it's trying to be, and instead of ending the Heavenly Host saga with a bang, it ended the saga with a very laggy whimper. At the same time as Blood Drive's development, Kedwin's company, renamed from Team Grizz to Grindhouse, were working on a direct sequel to Corpse Party, which went by the name of Corpse Party 2: Dead Patient, and is set 5 whole years after the events of Blood Drive. In that game, you follow a student called Ayame Ito, who has awoken in a hospital with no memory of what has happened before, and as per usual, corpses begin to start partying in the hospital. Dead Patient sets out to return Corpse Party to its smaller scale roots by having it set inside a hospital that seems abandoned. But a madness disease, as well as the aforementioned corpses, confirm the theory that she is not alone. The game is made on a new in-house engine developed just for Dead Patient, and it shows as the game's first chapter originally released in 2013, before Blood Drive was released, and it was full of bugs. The original lighting system that the game had to offer was extremely bad, and there were a lot of minor problems that came bundled with the existence of the game. These bugs have since been ironed out in a re-release in 2017 titled Dead Patient News, but since then, there has been absolutely nothing from this new sequel, leading many fans to believe that the game and the entire franchise is now languishing in development hell. There's not much else to really discuss about the game due to its unfinished nature, and it seems like development on the game isn't happening anymore, as the development team are focusing on remakes of the first game still. It's such a shame to see a franchise that started as well as Corpse Party did turn into nothing more than a fleeting conversation in the wind of people asking whether anything new's coming from it. I wish I could recommend going into the franchise as wholeheartedly as other games that I mentioned on this channel, but the sad reality is that going into the franchise is just setting you up for disappointment, as fans have used their disappointment to make their own headcanons about the Heavenly Host saga, whether it be through fan games or even fanfiction. Throughout the development of this video, I have gone through a lot of games and material and struggled through many of the Corpse Party games to get every single wrong end in the franchise from beginning to end, and after all of this, I still can't recommend playing anything else other than the very first game, as that small, self-contained gory horror game is all you need, and what Corpse Party truly is. It seems like the franchise suffered moving forward because everyone loved the original so much that the developers thought that the fans would want a continuation of a story that already had a concrete ending, and it's the serial escalation of the franchise that led it to its downfall and has left it in a state that can only be described as a corpse. Thank you guys for watching this video. This video is a result of 4 years of on and off working on the video, as I originally wanted to release it years ago, but I decided to wait until I was sure that the franchise wasn't doing anything significantly new so I can make an easier retrospective. Or post-mortem, if you will. I'm very much appreciative that you guys stick around to watch my new videos when they're out, and I will always be grateful that I have some of the most patient subscribers on the planet. But for those of you guys who want more videos from me in the meantime, I upload weekly content on my second channel where I play some of the games I talk about in videos on this channel, and play some others too. And all of those videos are fueled by the content on my Twitch channel, which I strongly suggest you follow and subscribe to in the description. My Discord server is also available, and you can join the server to get news about new videos and talk to me about production and post fan art if you really want to. And while you're at it, why not pledge to my Patreon? You can get access to scripts, producer credit on all of my videos, and golden access to a super secret chat full of fellow patrons and Twitch subscribers on my Discord server. Thanks to Josh Curbs, Melon Cake, Priont, Samariji, Jazz/Vincent, Ramsey, Thytonic, Dawn Fox, Mika, Axum, Bailey, Dag, Spiky, Imperfect, Zushiki, Lightspeed, Lady Datura, and Samurai XX05 for pledging to me with the Ascended pledge, and a special thanks to Nighttide Draco once again for pledging with $50. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go into a coma.